is it so damn dark in here?
Right.
Oh, crap. Well, I'm doing another main series Nintendo game, which means I may upset some people. Or not, I mean... Claire? Since fucking when?
I was waiting for you. I want to watch anime.
Well, maybe later. I mean, I've kind of got a job to do. You can help me if you want.
We? You?
Metroid. It's one of Nintendo's longest running game series, beginning its life all the way back on the original NES, following the interplanetary exploits of famed bounty hunter Samus Aran. The series has spanned many games, as well as many console generations. Metroid had a strange transition to 3D, however. Metroid was absent throughout the entirety of the Nintendo 64's life, and this was due to the Metroid series director, Yoshio Sakamoto, having no clear-cut ideas at the time for how to approach Metroid's transition to 3D, stating that he held the N64 controller in his hands but just couldn't imagine using it to control Samus. Sakamoto even went as far as trying to approach another game studio asking if they could develop a Metroid game for the N64, to which the studio responded saying that they were not confident in being the one to handle Metroid's transition to 3D, due to not thinking they could make something better than the previous Metroid game, Super Metroid. And as such, Metroid totally skipped a generation of gaming due to nobody knowing how to approach the matter, and Metroid would not appear again until Metroid Fusion released on the Game Boy Advance in November 17th, 2002. On the same day, the first 3D Metroid game developed by Retro Studios, Metroid Prime, released to critical acclaim for the Nintendo GameCube. People adoring the first-person shooter take on Metroid. This then led to a couple sequels, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, again on the GameCube, and later Metroid Prime 3 Corruption on the Nintendo Wii. Now before I delve in any deeper, full disclosure, I am by no means a Metroid expert. I haven't played very deep into the games themselves. My main experience with the Metroid series comes from playing Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo, Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance, as well as playing the first couple of hours of Metroid Prime on the GameCube, which by the way I fully intend to play all the way through at some point. So you might be wondering why, out of all of the games in the series, and having never done a video on Metroid previously, I decided to start with Metroid Other M. Well, a couple of reasons. First one being, I talk about Wii games, so that's your first clue, and I know Metroid Prime 3 is on the Wii, but that's a sequel to a game that started on the GameCube, so...
Maybe you should have done GameCube instead.
Don't make me regret my life choices. But my main reason for wanting to cover Other M is simply morbid curiosity. You know exactly what I'm talking about. People everywhere saying, Other M sucks, Samus is terrible in Other M, etc, etc. And what can I say? Curiosity killed the cat. It didn't. It didn't. I don't know why I said that. First, let's talk about what a typical Metroid game experience is actually like. I think it's safe to say the first Metroid is the best place to start, but I'm going to use Metroid Zero Mission footage since it's the remake and is just a better looking and more refined version of the original. Not to mention, I don't own any of the 900 versions of the original Metroid which Nintendo has released alongside their favourite game ever, Ice Climbers. The original Metroid begins with Samus on the planet Zebes, which is pronounced Zebes, not Zebes, apparently. Being ordered to go there and destroy all Metroid organisms, and defeat the mechanical life form called Mother Brain. Now, a typical Metroid game is a 2D sort of action-adventure game set in an open area, which many would describe as a labyrinth. You start with a basic set of skills. You can run, jump and shoot. Usually you start with a short blaster that can only go so far. Metroid games are all about upgrades, and if you're anything like me, you'll love that shit. I don't know, man, there's just something so fun and satisfying about upgrades in Metroid games, because they're not just there for the sake of it. Most upgrades are usually there to help you progress through the game, allowing you to open new doors you previously couldn't open. That's something very unique about Metroid, is the way it goes about sealing off areas instead of running around finding keys. For doors, you instead find new upgrades such as missiles, and you have to shoot a door with a particular power-up in order to get through. I think I prefer this, honestly. It fits Metroid and feels more organic. I can get a bit fed up when a game just devolves into chasing keys. At least here, the keys have other uses. Meaning you can defeat enemies easier, especially when returning to old areas, as there isn't any leveling up or anything like that, but enemies do take more hits the deeper into the game you go. Now, the different coloured doors which require power-ups to open, while that is a pretty common trope in Metroid, other games occasionally do it differently. Take Metroid Fusion for instance. A lot of areas in this game, while yes, they typically open with a blast, you occasionally have to go to security rooms to open all basic doors in a particular section. Another example of them mixing up would be in Metroid Prime. This time, the game was 3D, and while you still open basic doors by giving it a blast, you now have your scanner which you can use at various places to open doors, or move elevators. The beauty of Metroid is that it feels big. It's like a bunch of genres mixed into one. It's platforming, it's action, it's adventure, it's story. It has this cool space theme going for it, and it's so well received it practically created its own genre. Ever heard of the term Metroidvania? Well, Metroid created this gameplay style, which the Castlevania games later went on to emulate, as well as many other games which took inspiration from this iconic game. The Metroid game that everyone remembers the most, however, is Super Metroid. This game took the Metroid formula even further, making the world bigger, the plot and events more intense and action-packed, more power-ups, bigger bosses, and a beautiful 16-bit art style. Why am I telling you all this crap? Well, I feel it's important people know just how much of a legacy Metroid has, with a history of great 2D games under its belt as well as just as good or if not better 3D games in the Metroid Prime series. Metroid has a bad habit of just disappearing for entire console generations at a time though. As I mentioned, there was no Metroid on the N64, and it skipped out on the 3DS and Wii U too.
And I'm not even going to touch on Metroid Federation Force, thank you very much.
But then, out of nowhere we got not one, but two games on the Wii. The conclusion to the great Prime series and Metroid Other M.
And I've kept you waiting long enough, so let's talk about this apparent black sheep of the bunch. What?
Metroid Other M was headed as usual by Yoshio Sakamoto, who was the producer on the game as well as designing certain story elements. The actual design of the game, however, was handled by three people from the team who developed the Game Boy Advance titles, Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission, while the game itself was developed by third-party studio Team Ninja, the studio best known for creating the modern Ninja Gaiden games, and you know, the guys who made this piece of unforgettable gaming history.
What? And that is how you use motion controls. Get good, Nintendo. Then again, perhaps not.
All these members combined into one team called Project M, which was a combination of the Nintendo members, Team Ninja members, as well as a CG studio called D-Rockets, who did the cinematic cutscenes for the game. The reason Team Ninja were hired to develop Other M as opposed to the usual R&D team from Nintendo was due to Sakamoto's usual team not having the knowledge to make 3D games, whereas Team Ninja had been making 3D games for a while, being the team behind the more recent incarnations of Ninja Gaiden, a series Sakamoto was a fan of, which led to his interest in the studio taking the project.
I guess that makes sense, because, I mean, if I had a game series about a strong female lead, I'd definitely want to hand it over to these guys.
You may as well put boobs in the thumbnail.
I will not.
Sakamoto went into developing Other M with the idea to make a 3D Metroid game which felt similar to the classic Metroid games, as well as having a control scheme as simple as that of an NES controller.
We'll get to that.
With Other M, Team Ninja wanted to focus heavily on Samus's backstory, her history before becoming a bounty hunter, as well as just highlight how underneath that big power suit, she is a human, just like the rest of us.
And there it is, the infamous Metroid Other M story. Now, I've got a few more things I need to explain in regards to these parts, but let's just say that people are right to be upset with this.
So let's take a good hard look at who Samus Aran is and what Other M is all about. The game opens with a frankly gorgeous cutscene depicting Samus and her battle against Mother Brain and the subsequent death of the Metroid larva, which Samus refers to as the baby. This of course being the final boss from Super Metroid. But, as it turns out, this is just a dream, as Samus wakes up on a Galactic Federation facility to a distress signal coming from a ship which is hanging around a Galactic Federation vessel, so Samus heads in to investigate. Shortly after entering, she happens to bump into her old Galactic Federation platoon, and we're met with some small dialogue between the characters. Then we're introduced to Adam Malkovich, Samus' former commanding officer.
He's also the main reason this game is quite infamous, as you'll come to see.
At this point, the game essentially takes off properly. Samus agrees to help her friends search the facility, and there's your general rundown of roughly the first half hour of the game. The entire time, you get to bear witness to some beautifully animated CG cutscenes by the Studio D Rockets, the same studio who helped with the cinematic cutscenes for the Dead or Alive Extreme series, as well as the Team Ninja's own Ninja Gaiden 2. Although the one thing that brings these scenes down, just listen to Samus.
Okay, Samus. Everything's normal.
I awoke to the familiar voice of a quarantine officer.
Let's try sitting up, huh? Slowly now.
A dream. I had been reliving the tragic moments of my recent past. Thanks to the hyper beam, which was given to me somehow by the baby, I laid Mother Brain to waste.
She sounds so lifeless and monotone. I don't know if this is a case of bad actress or poor directing, but never did I expect Samus to sound so bland. It's almost like she's not even interested in the story she's telling.
Let's move on. It's time to talk about everyone's favourite controller ever.
GameCube?
No. The Wiimote.
Let's talk about the controls and overall gameplay first of all. Now, I only properly played this game recently when making this video, and beforehand I had only seen footage of Other M's gameplay, and every time I saw the footage of this game, I could never get a good feel of how this game played just from the footage alone. So let me give you a clear little rundown with a little visual aid to help clear things up. Firstly, this game is played holding the Wiimote horizontally, D-pad to the left, 1 and 2 buttons to the right, and you run around in 3D space with the D-pad, shoot with the 1 button and jump with the 2 button. A activates the morph ball mode, although I really think the morph ball should be the B trigger on the back, because in order to switch to the morph ball, you have to take your finger off the D-pad, hit the A button and then move back to the D-pad. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm some lazy asshole who hates moving my fingers or something, it's just annoying because it sort of disturbs your flow. Since you have to stop moving to change into the morph ball. At least if it was the B trigger, you already have a finger at the ready to hit it.
Oh my god, Scott. Get over it.
Okay, I'm fucking sorry, right?
Minor thing, I know, but it bothered me slightly. Now, here's where things get simultaneously interesting and finicky. This game has a few tricks up its sleeve, and this is why I laughed at the concept of making these controls simple. You occasionally have to switch from holding the Wiimote horizontal to holding it vertically, firstly to refill missiles. Yeah, you just kind of refill your missiles this time. I'll come back to this point, because in my eyes it's quite the design flaw, but more to the point, not just holding the Wiimote vertically, but pointing it to the screen to be picked up by the Wii's sensor bar. This switches you to first person mode, which lets you shoot your beam just like you would in a game like Metroid Prime. More specifically, Metroid Prime on the Wii's Metroid Prime Trilogy re-release, with the Wiimote and nunchuck controls. You fire by pressing the big A button, and you also have to hold the B trigger to look around the room. Otherwise, you're sort of locked in place, only being able to fire at the area immediately on the screen. B also serves as your scanner function, which is the bread and butter of the first person mode. You need to hold B down for literally everything. To fire missiles, hold B to lock onto something, and then press A. Now, when I saw the footage of Other M, the thing that always confused me was how things worked while running around in third person mode. How you aim and such while running around is just the D-pad, and it's actually quite satisfying. Same goes for jumping. Samus feels very nimble and quick. She can just run fast, jump high, and even jump off walls like usual. Shooting your beam is done with the 1 button, and it essentially locks onto enemies automatically. You need to make sure you have Samus facing the enemy's general direction, but for the most part you can rely on Samus to fire in the right location. Enemies are generally pretty weak, but some may need a little extra firepower. A pretty unique feature to Other M are these cinematic finisher moves that you may have seen. Take these two-legged enemies. Generally, you just need to incapacitate the enemy with 1 charged shot. Then start charging your beam again, but this time, while it's incapacitated, jump on its head and let go of the 1 button to finish it off. I really like these finisher moves. It's sort of unorthodox for Metroid games, but it adds more fluidity and action to the combat, and can make certain boss fights' finishing moves look amazing, leading to a more satisfying end to the fight. It can however feel like some enemies take way too many hits unless you do these finishing moves, but I feel they're generally a good thing. Now, Metroid games have always had somewhat difficult enemies that require a fair few hits before going down, and with transitioning into 3D space, it can make combat a bit more chaotic since you have so many more directions that you can run in. And to accommodate for this, they added a feature to Samus which I feel makes things far too easy. I'm speaking of Samus's dodge. Samus can dodge any enemy's attack simply by hitting the D-pad in any direction. So not holding the D-pad, but tapping it at the correct moment. And let me tell you, it's a very big window. There shouldn't be many instances where you allow yourself to get hit due to how easy it is to dodge. And if you happen to be holding the one button while dodging, it instantly charges your beam to full power, so it makes defeating enemies a breeze too. It's a cool feature, but I feel like it almost ruins the game a little since it makes things far too easy. During most fights, since attacking requires very little precision on the player's part, you can just keep ramming the D-pad in any direction while attacking to ensure you never get hit, and get to fire off some charge attacks in the process. It dumbs down the combat and not in a good way. Fighting a boss in Metroid is usually intense and feels difficult. They drain your health fairly quickly and with every hit, and the environment around you is often changed to add more challenge. It shouldn't be dumbed down to where it feels like nothing more than a chore. In saying that, the game is generally fun to play. As I mentioned, running around firing at enemies, jumping and climbing around all feels quite satisfying. However, it's definitely a lot more linear than most Metroid games. Yes, Metroid Other M is not your conventional Metroid game. Previous titles up until this point had all been essentially open world, allowing you to backtrack wherever you wanted, with progress being dependent on activating certain events and opening doors with different powers. Metroid Other M, on the other hand, has you running around what's called the Bottle Ship, being bossed around by your former Galactic Federation commander Adam Malkovich, while not being allowed to backtrack freely. You do go back and visit old areas to open up new doors with power-ups you've gained, even though most power-ups Samus already has, but she has to wait to be told by Adam,
Authorized. Samus, use your ice beam. Samus, activate the barrier feature on your suit to protect yourself from heat damage. The most efficient way through here should be delivering shoulder impacts with your speed booster, so I'm authorizing its use.
In a way, this game is more similar to Metroid Fusion in nature, since instead of games like Metroid Zero Mission or Metroid Prime, where you have to go around planets or old Chozo temples, Metroid Fusion takes place on an abandoned research facility that's been contaminated by the X organism. Other M takes place on the Bottle Ship, which is essentially that and requires some similar goals. Go here, turn the power on, open this door, find this security room, find this map data, etc, etc. One thing missing in Other M that I'm actually a little upset about though, are the iconic Metroid rooms. Older Metroids had a sort of modular build to them. Big rooms eventually leading to a door, which when you enter, the screen would then slide along to the next screen, and dotted around the levels you'd find save rooms, recharge rooms, map rooms and so on. And while Other M has save rooms that all generally look the same, it's missing the other iconic rooms. And while I'm talking about room transitions, I need to address a very unique problem this game has. The loading times on certain doors are monstrous. Just look at this. Now, this is particularly funny. One thing Metroid Prime was heavily praised for back in the day was its lack of loading screens. Now, the way Metroid Prime got away with this was by hiding loading behind the doors. Hence why when you shot some doors, it would take a couple of seconds for it to open. But you were never really bothered by it because it just sort of worked. Now, getting back to rooms, there would be no need for a recharge room in Other M because you don't need to recharge your missiles or anything this time, since, as I mentioned, you can just regain empty missile tanks by holding the Wiimote vertically and holding A. Now, I said I was going to come back to this point because this is a very poor design choice if you ask me. Because here's the gist of this game. You heal yourself up when you're at low health by holding the Wiimote vertically and holding A. You regain missiles by holding the Wiimote vertically and holding A. And comparing this to old Metroid games, do you see the problem?
What is the point in killing enemies? Well, there is none. Before, you would get these whenever you killed an enemy. Now, it feels like there's no point in even bothering.
Just run by. You may as well. Chances are you'll save health that way, and even though you don't need to worry about using missiles are so awkward to use in this game that you generally don't feel like using them anyway. Now, I don't want to come across like I dislike this game. I actually quite enjoy it. To me, as long as playing it feels fun and satisfying, I can let a few flaws slide, and the whole no pickups thing, while an odd design choice, since it means there's no point in killing all the little minions dotted around other than because why not, it really doesn't get in the way of you enjoying it. It just weakens certain elements of the experience and means you never have to worry about not having enough resources. Be this a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. As much as I enjoy the general gameplay of Other M, there are some annoying mandatory sections where Samus slows to a walk and the camera follows close behind her. These parts usually leading up to a cutscene, and while I can understand they're trying to be all cool and cinematic, they slow the game to a crawl and make me wish you could just skip them, which of course you can't, but even with this, the biggest annoyance in Other M by far are the unskippable scanner sections. These happen occasionally during the story-heavy sections of the game, usually right after a cutscene where you need to use a scanner to arbitrarily find something to activate the next cutscene, and sometimes you're just not sure what you're looking for. It can entirely halt the game, and of course these are also unskippable. We get it, Other M, you have a very important story to tell, but I just want to play! Now, like I said before, Samus essentially has all of her abilities at the start of the game, as demonstrated slightly by the tutorial at the beginning. Samus shows off dodging, charge beam, morph balls, bombs, missiles, and power bombs. You do occasionally pick up power-ups, but for the most part the only pickups in the game are missile tanks, energy tanks, and Excel charges, which power up how quickly you can charge up your beam. All of the abilities Samus has carry over from Super Metroid, since this game is set between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. So you can expect things like power bombs, super missiles, speed booster, shine spark, ice beam, wave beam, and so on and so forth. All of these must be authorized by Adam when the situation calls for it, with the occasional power-up being picked up by defeating enemies such as the dispersing charge beam, which makes the charge beam explode on impact for big damage. Moves like the speed booster and shine spark work really nicely in this game, always favourite moves of mine. They're very visually interesting and just look badass. I can't understand why they implemented this idea, having Adam tell Samus when she can use her various suit features. It's a way of limiting what the player can use without having her suit miraculously reset like in most games, but it honestly comes across once again as a lazy design choice. The beauty of picking up power-ups in previous Metroid games was due to how the worlds were designed around your limitations at specific points. Something as simple as not being able to grab onto a ledge to get up signifies, I guess I'm not meant to go that way yet. It meant they could tell players where they needed to go in a less in-your-face way, simply because it played in your limitations, and when you gained the required ability, you could then proceed onwards until you hit the next obstacle. Having it simply be, oh, Samus just doesn't feel like using it just now because a scary man says so, makes things feel lazy from a design point of view, meaning they don't need to invest as much brainpower into placement of power-ups and overall level design. And it's also just kind of frustrating because you have the knowledge that Samus can just casually use these features at any point, if she wanted to, which means when you get to an obstacle that requires a particular suit feature, but the ability hasn't been authorized yet, just feels dumb. The most glaring flaw of this authorization process is when it comes to the Varia feature. The Varia suit is nothing new in Metroid, a feature which makes the suit able to withstand high temperatures. In Metroid Other M, however, you have to go through a long-winded area filled with lava and lava enemies, the atmosphere in these rooms being so hot and uninhabitable that Samus' health constantly decreases when exposed to these conditions. You'd think for purely survival's sake, Adam would tell her, "Oh Samus, that perfectly harmless feature of your suit, which is literally just there to keep you alive so you can do my work for me, yeah, maybe turn that on." Instead, you go all the way through to the point where Samus nearly dies, and then he finally wakes up from his fucking nap long enough to allow Samus to turn on her Varia feature.
Yep, this is the part that everybody has ranted about. But I'll keep this short.
My biggest issue with the Varia suit feature not being authorized is that from a purely storytelling standpoint, it undermines Samus as a character. Am I to believe Samus Aran, badass galactic bounty hunter extraordinaire, would allow herself to perish due to a little bit of heat? Of course not! Hell, part of this game's plot is about how she chose the route of independence, rather than staying in Adam's unit. She'd have the common sense to turn it on herself. I think I could even appreciate Adam's authorization process if Samus occasionally overruled him. It would make this whole situation more believable and would demonstrate Samus' own tactile mind and problem solving skills, and make Adam more tolerable as a character. Not to mention down the line, there is one instance where Samus activates her suit features without Adam's approval. She does this because the situation called for it and Adam was out of touch at the time. So why does she go against Adam to hop over a little gap, but not to turn on a harmless function to stop her literally bursting into flames?
Any objections, Adam?
It's a very strange juxtaposition. Maybe this was due to bad writing or them feeling the later situation was more urgent. Either way, it makes the whole thing very inconsistent. It's said in the story that Adam had to make difficult choices, one of which was allowing his own brother to die in a horrible explosion to protect those aboard the ship which was nearby, even though Samus protested and wanted to save him. It showed his character, but they took that character trait, and that alone, and that is Adam Malkovich. It was a novel idea of artificially limiting Samus, but they did it at the expense of Samus' character. So how does Other M stack up graphically to previous 3D Metroids? Well, looking back at Metroid Prime these days, you can really see how aged some of the textures in Samus is, and how sort of muddy the game looks in a lot of places. Metroid Other M definitely has a lot more going for it in many areas. Samus herself looks fantastic in Other M, with a nice shiny suit, although all the details on her suit are achieved through bump maps. I see what you did there, Team Ninja. No, really, it's alright. It's the Wii. I know it's not super powerful. You did great. Round of applause. Most environments in Other M look pretty nice. The metallic sci-fi setting in the bottle ship with its augmented environments can completely change the look and feel of the game. That is, until they're powered down and you're reminded you're still just deep in the bells of a spaceship. But generally, most environments serve their purpose well. Although I have to say, certain sections of the game, most notably areas with lots of plants and trees, can look absolutely horrible. Look at that! That, my friends, is cardboard. If I cut up some paper in the shape of leaves and filled it in with a marker, it wouldn't be too dissimilar in appearance, but as I said, besides those parts, this game is generally quite nice looking. Enemies brought forward from older titles look how they should. Samus herself looks pretty great, weapons, explosions and effects all feel dynamic and energetic. Her animations feel fluid and adds to her overall powerful and nimble game feel. Now, something which surprised me about Other M is how some sections of the game and story almost feel like they're trying to convey a horror-style atmosphere, and in many cases they kind of accomplish it. Sometimes it feels more like a Resident Evil game or the darker scenes of Metal Gear Solid, and graphically it looks similar to these titles, although it's more obvious to me that a lot of the character models share more of a resemblance to the Ninja Gaiden games for obvious reasons. Overall, how do I feel about Other M? As a Metroid game, Other M feels as though it misses the point of what made a Metroid game actually good, what with previous installments having open worlds designed around power-ups and Samus' limitations at any given time. Other M's total misunderstanding of Samus' personality makes her a moronic, monologuing robot with no sense of self-preservation or backbone, relying too hard on Adam to tell her what to do. It feels more like a reskin Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry-esque game than a Metroid, but honestly I kind of like it. I'd be lying if I said I hated Other M. It fails in many places as a Metroid game, but despite its flaws, I enjoyed the gameplay. Shooting enemies for the most part felt satisfying, albeit pointless to a certain degree, and the story has some likeable characters, and it was genuinely interesting learning about Samus' past prior to being an independent bounty hunter.
Now, you may think I'm forgiving Other M for a lot. I understand that people have a lot of hatred for this game, but seriously, it's alright. Hello?
Hey, buddy, you're authorized to go fuck yourself.
Well, that was uncalled for.
I just want to watch anime.
Hello and thank you for watching this video. It means a lot that you would take the time to support the show just with your eyes. Go you, you're a great person. Anyway, I suppose I should push more videos onto you, shouldn't I? Well, if you want to, you can watch my last review, which was Let's Tap for the Wii, a game you play using a shoebox, or if you don't fancy that, then how about something non-Wii? Check out my review of Road Trip Adventure for the PS2, a quirky little car game that is very Japanese. Finally, I'd like to give a shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you would like to support me on Patreon, please follow the links in the description or the card on screen where you can find a few different rewards, such as for $10 I'll be divulging all my visual effects secrets and showing you how I made the effect at the beginning of this video, as well as exclusive early access to work in progress posts for videos and their animation assets, or even little previews of completed parts early for your viewing pleasure. And maybe even private Google Hangouts where we can play games, or you could watch me work on these videos. Regardless, every pledge helps, and more than that, every view, like and share helps me out tremendously. Now that's everything for now, so until next time.